Author event, Ebony Roberts, The Love Prison Made and Unmade, My Story.
The library and literati have given us this incredible opportunity, which I very selfishly, my first reaction to it was, my friend is coming back, because Ebony is an incredible human being who I've known for many years. And if you haven't read the book yet, you've got to buy a copy tonight and get home and start reading immediately, because it's an incredible read about a very important subject that touches a lot of our lives. And now to the highlight of the evening, the fabulous Ebony Roberts. My first encounter with Ebony involved a phone call sometime in 2009 or 2010. I was living in North Carolina at the time, teaching theater at UNC Chapel Hill and conducting research on a program at Michigan called the Prison Creative Arts Project, or PCAP for short. A Ford Foundation fellowship had enabled me to spend the 2008-2009 school year in Michigan following Professor Buzz Alexander and his students at the University of Michigan as they facilitated arts workshops in prisons. In a theater workshop inside Parr Highway Correctional Facility in Adrian, I met an extraordinary man named Shaka Senghor. I followed that theater workshop for about 8 months until it ended, and then I corresponded with Shaka via snail mail about his experiences of writing and theater and how that shaped his incarceration. At some point in our correspondence, Shaka gave me a phone number for a woman named Ebony Roberts and said that she could get me a copy of a workbook that he'd written to help children correspond with their incarcerated parents. I thought at the time Shaka was connecting me with his publisher, and he was. Ebony had managed to pull together funding, publicity, printing, and distribution for several of Shaka's books, essentially forming a very small independent press for a single author under the moniker Drop a Gem Publishing. I had no idea when I picked up the phone to make that call that I would be encountering the one-woman enterprise who could pull off such a feat. And I also hadn't realized I would be talking to Shaka's fiancé and meeting a lifelong friend. In the years that followed, I came to know a great deal more about the remarkable woman here beside me. You can read her online bio to find out that Dr. Ebony Roberts holds both a bachelor's degree and a PhD in educational psychology from MSU, and that she's done significant prison activist work with #BeyondPrisons and many other organizations. You can get a sense from reading about her that she is a woman of remarkable fortitude and resourcefulness, that she has strong principles, and is brave enough to take a stand against the prison industrial complex, which severely diminishes all of our lives, whether we know it or not. We have the joy of Ebony's presence in Ann Arbor today because of her remarkable book, The Love That Prison Made and Unmade, recently published by HarperCollins. This memoir begins with Ebony's childhood and her parents' marriage, then describes Ebony's dating history with men who did not sufficiently appreciate her. The heart of the book lies in the relationship between Ebony and Shaka. They met while he was serving 19 years in the Michigan Department of Corrections, got to know one another in letters and prison visiting rooms, fell in love, and navigated together the overwhelming transition from incarceration to the outside world when he was released from prison in 2010. Their son, Sekou, might very well be the most intelligent, loving, and beautiful child on the planet. And this is in no small measure due to Ebony's outstanding abilities as a mother and the commitment that she and Shaka have made to be co-parents together, despite the fact that they are no longer a couple. The Love Prison Made and Unmade provides valuable insight into the immense pressures faced by those of us who have not been convicted of a crime, but whose lives are nonetheless utterly conscribed and dominated by the prison system. In the tradition of poet Asha Bandele's 1999 memoir, The Prisoner's Wife, Ebony's new book brings much-needed visibility to the millions of women in the United States who support and sustain incarcerated loved ones. She provides us an honest take on the challenges and strange blessings of what loving across the walls looks like. And in doing so, she makes potent critiques of the criminal carceral system. Please welcome me in joining Dr. Ebony Roberts for a conversation this evening.
I am absolutely speechless right now. I don't even know what to say. That was the best intro I've ever heard of anybody, but certainly of me. But thank you so much. It's such an honor to be sitting here across from you having this conversation. And again, thank you to Bennett and Tim for the opportunity. And I couldn't have had a better conversation partner tonight. we've known each other for so long, and just the way that we met, and just the personal connection that we both have to the prison system. And so I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Well, thank you. In terms of the introduction, all I did was tell the truth. You made it easy. But for our audience, some of whom may not know you as well as I do, I wanted to start by asking you to tell us a little bit about why you decided to write a memoir. Clearly, you have an extraordinary life and a story well worth telling, but how did you arrive at the point of knowing that a book was the right place to take it?
Good question. I've been asked that question many times because I never intended to write this book. The book was initially going to be a he said, she said. Shaka's a writer, and I'm a writer, and we had discussed writing a book together about our love story and how we met and fell in love. And after Shaka came home, we published his memoir about his life, both before he went to prison and his transformation in prison. And he kind of spoke a little on our relationship, and it was almost like, okay, well, that story's been told. Well, we don't need to rehash that story again. And so, but he said, you know what? I've already, told the story from my perspective. I think you should still tell the story, but from your perspective, because so many people are curious about this woman who stood beside me for 4 years. This intelligent woman, this person who sort of stood in the gap. And I was like, I don't want to write a story. I don't want to write a book. I had never written, other than a dissertation, which is a very different type of writing, as you know. I had never written anything of length. And so it was sort of a scary thought to be so vulnerable at length in a book form. But once Shaka's memoir, which we initially self-published, got picked up by Penguin Random House and was then reprinted and distributed widely and made the New York Times list, and we went on a book tour, and all these people were coming up to me at his book signings and saying, I wanted to meet you, and I wanted to know your story, and I want to find out more about you and how you fell in love with this man in prison. And that was when it clicked for me. Up until that point, I was really resistant to writing. And at that point, it was almost as if, the universe was pushing me to tell the story because it needed to be told, that there were people who needed to hear my story and who could get something out of it. So that's what made me finally decide to write.
Well, I'm so glad you did, because you had very different things to say about it than
Yes.
Shaka did. And a perspective that I think really matters to a lot of us who've had these kinds of experiences. I also, in doing my work on the families of the incarcerated, didn't realize that I was doing something that was so centrally connected to women until other women told me. And it sounds like this was happening to you too. So I'm wondering if you could talk about the kind of gendered relationship that women who are not in prison, but who are supporting somebody inside, have, both to the institution of the prison and to the people inside the walls who we support.
Yeah. There are over 2 million men and women incarcerated in the country, and all of those men and women are somehow connected to a family back home. They have mothers, wives, daughters. It's primarily women that hold up the men and women and support them throughout their incarceration. And they're kind of their voice is really not heard. We talk about mass incarceration and we talk about criminal justice reform, but their voices are really silenced, and their experiences aren't really a part of that conversation because, some of you may be familiar with the bail industry. And people are basically incarcerated through the bail industry because wives and mothers are putting up their houses and cars and all types of things to try to get bail to keep their family, their loved ones out of prison. They take the financial weight of incarcerated loved ones, but they also the emotional weight. When a person is locked away, there's a lot of alienation, a lot of shame associated with having a loved one who's incarcerated. The loss of income that comes with, especially if there's a husband or wife, the loss of income from the person who's no longer able to provide. There's just so many issues that women, primarily women, are dealing with when a loved one's incarcerated, but the focus so much is on, I was doing some research today, recent estimate, there are about 230,000 women incarcerated in prisons and jails in the United States. And so the large number of the incarcerated population is men. We know that the female population is growing, but the majority of those that are incarcerated are men, but the women are the ones that are impacted because they're the ones that are at home taking care of families, taking care of, sending money in and phone calls and visits. It's very, very expensive. I think 1 year I added all of the phone calls that I accepted, and I think it was about $3,000 for 1 year. And most families can't afford even a fraction of that. And so yeah, it's a very, very large expense emotionally and financially.
Absolutely. And whether the person inside is a man or a woman, it's still usually women on the outside who are holding it together, taking care of people's children, making the visits, paying for those phone calls, having their phones turned off because they can't pay for the phone calls.
Right.
All of that is there. So how did your relationship to prisons and the people inside them change when you went from being a person who did activist volunteer work in prisons to being a person who was in love with somebody inside and visiting as a loved one rather than a volunteer doing work in the prison? What was that transition like?
Yeah, that's a good question too. It changed in so many ways. I think that having the experience working in prisons first gave me a unique perspective to understand the political side of prison and the prison industrial complex. And I think that most families don't understand that part of the system, and oftentimes, solely blame the person that may be incarcerated for the circumstances that led them to prison. Sometimes they may be alienated or ostracized or what have you from their families because of the choices they made that led them to prison. But because of the work I had done in prisons, I had that politicized view of the system. And so I went into my relationship with a very different lens than I think a lot of families. And so I had to fight the power. Like whenever there was anything that Shaka dealt with in prison, and there were several instances where, the Michigan Department of Corrections, and in one instance, he was actually put in the hole, or what's known as the hole, or solitary confinement. He was put in, just because of some old charge from maybe 5 or 6 years ago. But he had been transferred to a new prison, and they thought he was a security risk. So they just put him in the hole for 7 days. He was not able to get out of a cell for 24 hours a day for those 7 days. Very minimal contact. I couldn't call. I didn't know where he was. And so because of that, that political consciousness that I brought, I was able to get on the phone and really advocate for him and for him to get transferred out of solitary confinement, and then from, a level 2 security to a level 1 security. And so having that experience bringing that experience was very different. But then I really, the organization that I worked for was called Helping Our Prisoners Elevate. It was based in Detroit, and we sent books into prisons. We also chartered buses that sent families up to visit their loved ones. Many people don't have transportation or reliable transportation to make those long drives. And so we had chartered a bus to Ionia. And for those of you who know Ionia, at that time, there were 5 prisons in this one small rural town in Michigan. You can imagine. So when we talk about the prison industrial complex, it's a big business. Prisons are a business. And so this small Michigan town had 5 prisons. And so we chartered a bus because there were so many prisons in this one city. We thought it would be easy to try to get as many people, in to see their loved ones. And at that time, I wasn't corresponding with Shaka. I just helped out of a love for people and out of love, for what I was doing, but I had no idea what they were carrying. I had no idea how much of a blessing having a free bus ride and a bagged lunch and, being able to visit all day And I had no idea, how important that was to them until I myself was in that situation and had to make those visits. And there were times when Shaka was shipped up north to the UP, and he was 8 to 10 hours away. And, I had to try to find carpools and try to, find ways to visit him. And I was grateful again. And this is the privilege that I recognized that I had a job that paid me well enough that I could, I had a car, that was in good condition. And so I could afford to take those 8 and 10 hour drives up north. But there were a lot of families who couldn't do that. And many people go years without seeing their loved ones. And so being in love, so having that experience on both ends, really allowed me to have a very different experience, I think, than the average person who has a loved one in prison.
Well, and it's why Shaka fell in love with you, too,
Yeah.
because you had that political consciousness
Yeah.
that's so dear to both of your hearts.
Yeah.
But one of the things you just mentioned about driving to the UP, to see him, one of the most devastating parts of the book, for those of you who are on the edge of your seats about to read it as soon as this talk is over, one of the things that really got me was that part of the book where you're talking about negotiating those carpools to get up there and having to decide, oh God, the snow came, and can we make it across the Mackinac Bridge in the snow? Is it safe to go? The person I was going to carpool with is a flake and doesn't show up when she says she's going to, and that means that I'll have to leave so late that it won't be worth it for me to get up there. And you have to make all of these kind of bone-chilling decisions about the ethics of going, what it's going to do to him not to have the visit or to have the visit, the same thing for yourself, and the economics of it. One of the reasons why this book is so important is because you layer that emotional experience on top of the political consciousness and make that real for people. And I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit more, as you do somewhat in the book, about how you take care of yourself in the middle of all of that, because you're doing so much to take care of the person inside the walls. But what do folks negotiating that out here need to know?
I wasn't taking very good care of myself. My focus became him, and there was a point when I was so lonely and so frustrated with the system and missing him so much. And I took a step back and I realized that no matter what I might be feeling or what I might be going through, that he had it worse. That at least I could go to the movies if I wanted to get a break away from the stress and strain of this life I had chosen. But, or I could go out with friends, or, I had choices. And as miserable as I was during those years, I still had choices that he didn't have. And so, and I would never, in any relationship, in that relationship, the power dynamic is there's no, it's not balanced, right? Because he was solely dependent on me for a lot of things, right? And so, and I took that responsibility seriously. And so I took on a lot of weight, and I was not taking care of myself as well as I needed to, because I felt like he needed me and he didn't have, the support that he needed to do the things that he wanted to do. And so there were times when I just, was so depressed that I didn't leave the house. I turned down offers to go out. I turned down offers to go to concerts and do fun things because, I didn't want to have to talk about, the, small talk. It wasn't, when you're talking about relationships, when you say that you're in a relationship with somebody who's in prison, there's all kinds of, judgment. People have questions. They have, doubts about you. Are you crazy? And so I didn't share that. And so it was really hard to be in social settings with other couples talking about their partners, and I couldn't be free to talk about my partner. And so a lot of times I just, kind of created like a little cocoon around myself and just, visited him, sent letters, and my world revolved around him. And that was not a good thing.
And how does that dynamic change at the moment that he comes home?
Yeah, it was really hard because, you know, we made a decision when Shaka came home to live together. And I think that was one of the decisions that, if I have any regrets, that's a decision that I regret, because we went from not seeing each other every day, even though my world revolved around him and his world revolved around me. We went from not seeing each other every day to now we're living in the same house and we see each other every single day. And anybody who's ever been partnered up knows that things change. The dynamics of your relationship change when you go from just dating to living together. And so our relationship changed considerably. And areas where I thought, okay, now he's home, I don't have to worry about this stuff anymore. I couldn't take a day off because he was transitioning from, life in prison and still needed me in many ways, many more ways than I thought. And one of the things that I want people to get out of the book is that, you know, for Shaka and so many men like him, they come home and, well, I'll just speak for Shaka. He felt like prison didn't break him. He came home, he was in good mental health, that, he had survived. And so he didn't realize that there was so much trauma from prison that he had not addressed, that he really couldn't address until he came home. And so because of that trauma, we struggled in the beginning, and him just trying to transition. And, when he initially came home, he said, I got this, don't baby me. He came home at 39, he got locked up at 19. And so he thought, don't baby me, I got this. He had been preparing as much as he could from inside. And so, I thought that he was gonna be okay. And so I kind of let up a little bit and realized that actually he needed more of me than I thought initially. And so when I thought I was gonna have a break, it ended up being even more on me, because I had skill sets, I had experience, and I had resources that he had not developed in the 19 years that he had been incarcerated. So it was still a lot on me. And, being the primary breadwinner, again, as you mentioned earlier with, these gender, so I was still the primary breadwinner. When he was locked up, I was primary breadwinner, taking care of all the bills on my own. But when he came home, he struggled to find a job. And we had published several of his books, and so he was selling his books out of the trunk of our car, and was trying to, build up the publishing business that we had started. But, I was still the person that was primarily taking care of everything. So it was a huge weight still on me. And I didn't know how to create the balance to take care of myself the way that I needed to.
It's a really, really hard one, especially when you're confronted with somebody who needs so much care.
Yeah, and you don't give up on them,
No.
because you figure my needs will come. I have needs, but they'll come later. He needs me right now.
And there's this, in my own life, my father also spent 20 years in prison, and when he came home, we felt very much like, oh my God, we need to pour in all the love and care that we couldn't give in person during those 20 years that he was out of the house. And then all of a sudden there's that, but at the same time, his very strong desire to be independent, to be seen as a person who was a leader and authority, someone with something to contribute. And then the rest of the world is saying, like, you don't know how to use the internet? My father hadn't even figured out how to use an ATM machine because he'd been gone for so long. And so there's all this little stuff that for a grown person, a man or a woman coming home from that amount of time, feels infantilizing and like, I should know these things about the world. And there's an added layer there that it's embarrassing that you know and he doesn't. And it's such a hard dynamic to negotiate. This book is not a kind of primer on how to deal with a relationship with somebody in prison. It's an honest account of what you went through. And that's one of the things that I so appreciate about it, because so often people who are writing about how prisons work are sort of telling you the right way to do it. And you instead give us this really open portrait of your life and how hard those challenges were and how some things work out and some things don't. What do you say to the people who want the fairy tale ending for you and Shaka?
That still want that fairy tale ending?
Or who want, I mean, I can imagine that readers would want it at the end of the book. I knew the punchline before I started reading, but a lot of other people might, I mean, the title says The Love That Prison Made and Unmade, but because you're both such extraordinary people, I can imagine a large readership really wanting somehow for you to get in there and fix it right now because your love story is so compelling. How do you respond to that?
You know, I think that everything happens for a reason, and I have no doubt in my mind that we were destined to meet. We were destined to grow in love. We were destined to create this beautiful boy that we have. But I also believe that we were not destined to be forever. And there were some really valuable lessons in life that each of us had to learn. And I do believe that we're soulmates, and soulmates come into our lives to stir things up, right? We think of this fairy tale, we think of the soulmate story as this fairy tale, and you're gonna ride off into the sunset and you're gonna have all this bliss. But in fact, it's the opposite, because your soulmate is usually your mirror. And in many ways, Shaka was my mirror, and a lot of his trauma mirrored my trauma in different ways, but our childhoods were similar in some ways, and so we mirrored each other in a number of ways. And he put a mirror up to my issues, and I did the same for him. And we didn't really realize how deep that trauma and that pain was until he came home and we had to deal with the day-to-day life. But I believe that we're better as co-parents and friends, and that we both needed the love and care that we provided to each other at that point in our life in order for us to be the human beings that we're showing up in the world as today. I honestly believe that I'm a better woman and a better mother because of that relationship, and I think he would say the same thing.
I'm interested in why you called the book The Love That Prison Made and Unmade, because the key grammar in there for me is that prison is the thing making and unmaking. What does that mean to you?
So we know that prison is a very ugly place, and not much good comes out of prison. And I wanted people to see that despite those circumstances, that something beautiful could come of that, experience. And, you have to fight for it. The prison system is designed to break apart families and to make it extremely difficult to maintain connections of any kind, whether it's with children, whether it's with partners, with, parents. And so we forget that they're in prison. I'm changing my language, and we say men and women who are incarcerated instead of calling them inmates or calling them prisoners, because they are still human and they have an identity beyond where they are. And so I think that it's important that we see their humanity, and that there is something still beautiful that can be created out of that experience. But on the flip side of that, not that I place blame, but I do place some responsibility for the unraveling of our relationship on prison and the impact that it had on Shaka's life, and the ways that he showed up or didn't show up in the world once he came home were greatly impacted by those 19 years, and that had a lot to do with why our relationship didn't work.
One of the things that I've hesitated to ask you about, but that I think is important, is that people say such nasty things about women who fall in love with a man in prison. Mm-hmm. And I feel like this book is in many ways a response to the assumptions that people make about the kind of woman who would fall in love with a man in prison and what her insecurities and all of these things must be. And I know that you've heard some of those terrible things said to you in person and online. You talk about the communities that you were a part of online as you navigated what this relationship meant to you while he was still inside. what do you say to those people who want to make all sorts of assumptions about who a woman must be in order to be willing to date a man in prison and fall in love?
You know, it's an uphill battle. That's an ongoing conversation. I hope that my book will contribute to it, but at the same time, some of you may be familiar with a reality TV show called Love After Lockup, I think is the name of it.
There's one called Prison Wives, I think, too. I don't watch
Prison
any
Wives,
of those, but
yeah, I think there
are multiple shows.
There's multiple shows, and it's reality TV, and of course, it's the worst of reality TV. So it shows, it really, it stokes the fire, you know, all of the stereotypes that you have. And so I have one story, and then there's all these other stories that, you know, people see on reality TV. I really want people to, because there's people who still think I fit the bill as a stereotypical woman, because I did have some insecurities. I did have some issues.
For crying out loud, who doesn't?
Yeah,
That's absurd.
But, you know, so there are some people who feel like, oh, well, yeah, she had these insecurities, and he fed her all these beautiful words, and, you know, she fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. And, you know, so people are going to walk away with it, walk away from the book with, you know, different opinions. Sometimes people walk into any situation already with their mind made. And so they read it, and it only confirms what they read only confirms what they already believed. And then sometimes you can read something if you walk into it with an open mind, and it actually changes your mind and makes you think about things differently. But I think that, you know, while the relationship is obviously very different, you know, one parallel that I would make to the relationship that I have with Shaka is long distance relationships. For anybody who's been in a long distance relationship and has struggled with, you know, missing someone and not being able to be with a person every day, and having to, you know, cultivate a relationship long distance is really hard. We think nothing of those relationships because the person, you know, presumably is free and has not done anything, you know, wrong. But we're still both human, you know. That relationship is different in that one person isn't incarcerated, but, you know, we're still both very human, and love knows no boundaries. And I don't think that, you know, I didn't go searching for love, and I don't, you know, knock anybody who does. I know there are, you know, prison matchmaking services and, you know, pen pals, and people do choose to go that route. That wasn't the route I chose. So I want people to just understand that, you know, love found me, and I wasn't looking for it. And sometimes you can't resist when love, you know, when you find that person that, you know, that you feel is, you know, you were destined to meet. So. And I think that a lot of people feel that way. I don't know any woman, and I'm in a lot of groups and online, you know, discussions about, you know, with women who are in love with men incarcerated. Some of them are with men who are in prison for life. And they all feel the way that I felt. This is the man that God, you know, designed for me. And this is the man that I want to spend the rest of my life with. And I don't think that that's any different from any other woman that falls in love. You know, we're all hoping for, you know, for love, and all hoping for the best. And, you know, I personally don't think I could have done a life, like not knowing that there was no, you know, no release date. I don't know that I could have done that. But I know that the women who make that decision, we all feel the same way. And you don't enter into that kind of situation unless you feel like this is my person. And they're worth, you know, for whatever reason, they're worth, you know, the time and effort and money and sacrifice that you face.
I love you, and I'm so proud of you, and I'm so honored to be here with you tonight.
This program was recorded on November 21st, 2019, at the Ann Arbor District Library.